Fascinating and Strange presents 19th Century Dark Crimes. The Lafarge Murder, the 1840 Trial of the Century. The Marriage of Unequals. In the winter of 1839, two people from utterly different worlds were brought together by a single decision. A marriage meant to save them both. For one, it promised comfort and stability. For the other, refinement and respectability. But neither could imagine how quickly that promise would curdle into deception, despair, and death. This is the story of Marie and Charles Lafarge and the marriage that birthed a mystery, a tale of poison, pride, and the dawn of modern forensic science. The Parisian Girl. Marie Fortuné Capelle was born in Paris in 1816, into a name more noble than rich. Her father had been an artillery officer under Napoleon, killed before she could speak his name. Her mother, of the Courtship family, well-born, cultured, ambitious, died not long after. An orphan before the age of 5, Marie was raised by her grandmother and a great-uncle in a house heavy with memories of better days. They lived among relics, fine china, dusty portraits, and the ghosts of former grandeur. Her education was impeccable: languages, music, literature, art. She spoke English and Italian, quoted Rousseau, played the piano with precision and grace. She was bright, charming, elegant, and, by all accounts, aware of it. But as the years passed, fortune faded. The apartments grew smaller, the servants fewer. And in the glittering social world of post-revolutionary Paris, a woman without wealth was a woman adrift. Her guardians began to whisper what all families whispered when their daughters reached a certain age: she must marry. The ironmaster. Far from Paris, in the gray hills of Corrèze, another life was unfolding. Charles Pouch Lafarge was the son of a provincial businessman. Where Marie's ancestors wore medals and silk, Charles wore soot and calluses. He was practical, honest, and ambitious, a man who rose by work, not birth. By the late 1830s, he owned an iron foundry near the old Chateau of Glandier, a sprawling property he was proud to call his own. The work was hard, the air thick with smoke and heat. But to Charles, this was success. Yet for all his hard work, success had been elusive. He was fighting bankruptcy, a fact that he would deceptively hide from Marie. However, ever the optimist, he was sure he could turn things around for the foundry with the right connections to the Parisian elite. And when he heard of a young woman from Paris, noble, educated, and seeking a husband, he thought his chance had come. A marriage of convenience. In the summer of 1839, their families arranged an introduction. Marie's relatives presented Charles as a man of means and character. Charles's friends described Marie as a woman of distinction. They met briefly in Paris. He was kind but awkward, thick-set, 40 years old. She was poised, 23, with luminous eyes and a cool smile. Their conversation was polite but distant. Still, the match was approved. For Marie, the marriage promised security, a return to comfort, a respectable home. For Charles, it promised status, refinement, perhaps even love. Within weeks, they were wed. The ceremony was quiet, unremarkable. They were strangers in the eyes of God, united by necessity more than passion. As they left the church, Marie's veil trembled in the cold wind. She whispered to a friend, "I have accepted my destiny. May it be gentle." The journey south. Days later, she boarded a stagecoach bound for the south of France. Her new home, her new life. The journey was long and bitterly cold. Outside, the landscape grew wilder, emptier, stripped of all Parisian grace. Villages turned to fields, fields turned to forest. As the carriage neared Corrèze, frost covered the windows like white lace. Marie's gloved hands tightened in her lap. In her mind, she pictured a chateau glittering with chandeliers and velvet drapes. She imagined laughter, warmth, the scent of roses. What she found was something else entirely. The Chateau of Glandier. The carriage stopped before a gray, sprawling building half swallowed by fog. The Chateau of Glandier loomed over the barren hills, part mansion, part ruin. Its windows were dark, its walls damp with moss. The air smelled of coal smoke from the foundry below. Inside, the floors creaked, the ceilings dripped, and rats scurried behind the wainscoting. Marie's face drained of color. Charles, proud and smiling, gestured to the room. "Our home," he said. "It only needs a woman's touch." She managed a polite smile, but in her diary she would later write, "It was the death of all illusion." Still, she tried. She played the role of wife, hosting dinners, writing affectionate letters, learning the rhythms of this strange new world. Charles adored her, perhaps too much. To him, she was the crowning jewel of his hard-won fortune. To her, he was a kind but clumsy stranger, heavy, provincial, unrefined. In time, even kindness can become a kind of prison. In December, Charles left for Paris on business, a chance to secure a lucrative contract that could save his struggling foundry. Marie stayed behind. The days were long, the house silent. She wrote letters, sometimes affectionate, sometimes impatient, complaining of loneliness, of the cold, of the servants, of everything that wasn't Paris. And yet, she ended one note differently. "You are missed," she wrote, "and I pray for your health." It was that letter and the small gift that came with it that would change everything. The gift. Paris, December 1839. Charles Lafarge awoke that morning feeling perfectly well. The winter light poured in through his hotel window. Carriages clattered along the boulevard below. He was in good spirits. His meetings had gone well, and new contracts promised to save his struggling iron foundry back home in Corrèze. He was proud of his work, proud of his wife waiting for him at home. He even allowed himself to imagine a new start for them both. Then, as he dressed for the day, a package arrived. A small box tied neatly with ribbon, the handwriting unmistakably hers. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a homemade cake, a simple gesture of affection from his young wife, Marie. A letter accompanied it. "My dear Charles, I send you this cake as a token of my affection. Eat it and think of me." Charles smiled. Perhaps at last she was learning to love him. He offered slices to his clerks, joking that his wife's baking might finally kill him. And by mid-afternoon, he'd eaten the rest himself. Then, the pain began. The onset. It began with a twist of nausea, faint and fleeting. He blamed it on travel, on fatigue, perhaps on the rich Parisian meals. But within an hour, that unease grew into agony. A burning sensation spread through his abdomen, twisting tighter and tighter. He clutched at his stomach, sweat forming on his brow. The pain came in waves, sharp, stabbing, relentless. By evening, Charles was doubled over, retching violently. Every swallow of water brought fresh torment. The cramps were so severe they bent him forward until he gasped for breath. The physician who examined him found no clear cause, only that his pulse was weak, his skin clammy, his body trembling with exhaustion. He was given laudanum for pain and told to rest. All through the night he vomited until there was nothing left to bring up but bile. By dawn he was pale, shivering, and spent, but alive. The doctor pronounced it a common stomach illness. Charles accepted the diagnosis, relieved. He would never know that something far deadlier was already working its way through his veins. The return to Glandia, the final decline. It was a gray January morning when Charles Lafarge's carriage pulled into the courtyard of Glandier Chateau. He was weak, thinner than before, but optimistic. The illness in Paris, he told the servants, had been nothing serious. He only needed rest and his wife's company. Marie met him at the door, elegant as ever, wrapped in furs. She embraced him, her expression serene, her voice calm. The servants noticed how pale she looked, how she pressed him to eat the broth she had prepared herself. Charles, ever trusting, smiled and said softly, "It's good to be home." For a few days, his strength seemed to return. He took short walks in the frosty garden, speaking of the future, of new furnaces for the foundry, new business partners, and how the coming year might finally bring prosperity. He spoke with tenderness of Marie, telling his mother, "She has been an angel to me." But the illusion of recovery was brief. On the fourth night, the pain returned. It began again in the stomach, that same gnawing burn that seemed to come from deep within. Then the vomiting. Then the cramping, sharper this time, relentless, pulsing through his entire body. He barely slept, the sheets soaked with sweat. Each breath came shallow and quick. His fingers trembled so violently that he could not hold a spoon. Marie sat by his side, offering comfort, wiping his brow, whispering prayers. She fed him a mixture of milk and egg, spoon by spoon. Moments later, he began to retch again. The next day, his pulse weakened further. The doctor, confused and alarmed, noted how strange the illness seemed. Charles's skin was ashen, his eyes glassy, sunken. His mouth was parched, his tongue coated white. He begged for water, but every sip made the pain worse. When he tried to sit, his body shook uncontrollably, waves of chills and fever coursing through him. The cramps spread to his legs and back, locking the muscles tight until he cried out. His breathing grew ragged. The local priest was called to pray at his bedside. The household gathered in silence. Outside, frost crept across the windows, a white film of ice that seemed to mirror the pallor of his skin. Systemic collapse. By now, the poison had done its work. The arsenic, swallowed days before, had traveled through his bloodstream, inflaming his stomach, corroding his intestines, and attacking his nerves. His body was shutting down piece by piece. He could no longer stand. His vision blurred. His heartbeat slowed, irregular, fluttering. He complained of a burning in his chest, as though the very blood in his veins had turned to fire. The doctors, helpless, tried purgatives, mustard plasters, and tonics, anything that might draw out the humors. But none of it worked. Marie continued to nurse him, her composure unshaken. She prayed aloud, wiped his lips, fed him gruel. She even smiled faintly when he whispered her name. To the family she appeared saintly, the perfect wife in tragedy. But one servant swore she saw something else. Marie, in the kitchen late at night, leaning over a small bowl of white powder. The final hours. On January 13th, 1840, Charles's condition grew desperate. He had not eaten for days. His stomach was distended, his lips cracked. His body was racked by tremors, his breath short and rasping. Each moment of consciousness brought new pain. He groaned that it felt as though his insides were tearing themselves apart. His mother sat weeping at his bedside. Marie, composed and pale, murmured soft words of comfort, smoothing the pillow beneath his head. Shortly after midnight, he fell into a stupor, his heartbeat faint, his breathing slow. The doctor leaned close, then whispered the words no one wanted to hear. Charles Lafarge was dead, aged 40. Marie wept quietly beside him, her hand resting on his chest. To everyone around her, she seemed the picture of dignity and grief, the perfect widow, but not everyone was convinced. A servant whispered to a neighbor, "He was never right after that cake." In the days that followed, the chateau grew silent. Marie dismissed the servants one by one, ordered the bedding burned, and instructed that no one enter the sick room. She wrote letters to Paris, formal, polite, about inheritance, property, and legal matters. The villagers buried Charles in the frozen ground behind the church. They said he'd been a good man, simple, honest, kind, and though they bowed their heads, they whispered still. About the young wife who smiled too calmly and the cake that had been sent to Paris. Those whispers would soon reach the magistrate, and what began as a death from natural causes would become one of the most extraordinary criminal investigations of the 19th century, a case that would change science and justice forever. The investigation, the science of the invisible, whispers and unease. At first, there was only gossip, a servant whispering to a neighbor, a shopkeeper murmuring that Madame Lafarge had bought too much arsenic for rats. The whispers spread from the kitchen to the churchyard, from Glandier to the town of Toul. Within weeks, word reached the local authorities, and on a cold January morning, a magistrate arrived at the gates of the Lafarge estate. He found Marie in mourning black, pale and composed, her voice calm but sharp. She received him with elegance, insisting her husband had died of a gastric fever. But when the magistrate asked to search the house, she hesitated. Too long. The search. Inside Marie's writing desk, investigators found letters, dozens of them, to friends in Paris. Some were affectionate, others not. "I am dying of boredom," she had written weeks before. "My husband is kind, but coarse, a dull and heavy man. I cannot breathe here." In the kitchen, they found small glass jars and packets of white powder labeled arsenic. She explained that it was to kill rats. Yet, in the pantry, the rat traps were empty. The magistrate sealed the evidence and ordered the unthinkable for a woman of standing, the exhumation of her husband's body. The post-mortem. In February 1840, the coffin of Charles Lafarge was brought from its frozen grave. A hush fell over the crowd as the lid was lifted. The smell was unbearable. The body was bloated, discolored, but still recognizable. Physicians collected samples of stomach, liver, intestines, and sealed them in glass jars. They would be sent to Paris, where a renowned chemist would determine whether they contained poison. That chemist was Mathieu Orfila. Mathieu Orfila was already a legend, a professor of chemistry at the Sorbonne, admired throughout Europe. He had spent years studying poisons, especially arsenic, known in his day as the inheritance powder. It was invisible, odorless, and lethal even in tiny doses. Until now, its presence could rarely be proved. But Orfila had perfected a new test, a method that could make the invisible visible. It was called the Marsh test. By combining the sample with zinc and acid, then igniting the vapor that rose from it, the faintest trace of arsenic could be transformed into a mirror of silver on glass. For the first time in history, science could speak for the dead. The experiment. The jars from Glandier arrived in Paris, labeled simply Case Lafarge. Orfila began the test in silence, his assistants watching closely. He measured, mixed, and heated each sample in turn. Hours passed, the lab filled with a faint metallic odor. Then, as the vapor condensed on glass, a silver-gray film appeared, arsenic in the organs, in the breadcrumbs, in the milk Marie had fed her husband. There was no doubt Charles Lafarge had been poisoned. The trial of the century. The trial opened that summer in Toul. The courthouse overflowed. Nobles, scientists, journalists, and curious citizens packed every seat. At the center sat Marie Lafarge, veiled in black. Elegant, pale, unreadable, she denied everything. She claimed her husband's death was natural, a cruel twist of fate. Her lawyers argued that the science was flawed, that arsenic could be found everywhere, in wallpaper, cosmetics, even the glue on envelopes. They claimed the samples were contaminated, but Orfila's testimony changed everything. He described each step of his experiment, each reaction, each unmistakable trace of arsenic. The courtroom listened in awe. Science had replaced superstition. The invisible had become proof. On September 19, 1840, the verdict was read. Guilty. Marie Lafarge fainted as the words echoed through the chamber. She was sentenced to life at hard labor, spared the guillotine only by her gender and social rank. Even as she was led away, she declared, "I am innocent, but I am also destroyed." She would spend the next 12 years behind prison walls, her health fading, her letters filled with despair. In 1852, she died of tuberculosis, still proclaiming her innocence. The legacy. The Lafarge case changed everything. Before it, guilt or innocence depended on confession, rumor, or the guesswork of doctors. After it, truth could be measured, seen, proven. Mathieu Orfila's methods became the foundation of modern forensic toxicology. His Marsh test spread across Europe, used to solve hundreds of murders once thought unknowable. And Marie Lafarge, guilty or not, became a symbol of the new age of evidence. Her name marked the moment when emotion gave way to analysis, when intuition gave way to chemistry, and when, for the first time, the dead could speak through science. Was Marie Lafarge a cold-blooded poisoner, or a victim of science in its infancy? No one can say for certain. But what began as a quiet illness in a lonely chateau became a revolution in the way humanity defines truth.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more tales of the fascinating and strange. I'm not kidding. Please like and subscribe. If you do that, I promise not to come find you.